Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone, and welcome to our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you are joining us today for the first time, potentially you would have participated either in our kickoff webinar or watched the recordings that are available on our website. We'll spend just a few minutes on the housekeeping and then from the previous programs, and then we'll go over into the content for this webinar. This webinar is co-sponsored by two organizations, IFC, the International Finance Corporation, a member of the World Bank Group, as well as the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance. My name is Rusmir Music, and I am the Operations Officer at IFC. I will be serving as your Master of Ceremonies today, and I will call on our distinguished speakers to contribute their interventions. As I mentioned, this is a second in the series of webinars that is repeated every 3 weeks through May. And we'll be taking you through tools and investment programs that can unlock finance for green and resilient hotels. Each of the webinars will be recorded, and the presentations and the recording will be shared on the landing site from which you registered for this. As I mentioned, the recording for the kickoff webinar is already available online. Just as a point of housekeeping, you can change your layout for WebEx in the top right-hand corner. This will give you a side-by-side speaker view and will make the presentation screen a little bit bigger. During the webinar, you can ask your questions via the chat feature in the WebEx application, and we will be sure to answer them at the end. I am pleased to introduce Claire Whiteley, Head of Environment at the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance. As a quick recap of the previous webinar, Claire, can you remind us what the Alliance does?
Of course, thanks, Rusmir. So the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance brings together engaged hospitality companies and strategic partners. We use the collective power of the industry to deliver impact within local communities and on global issues. And we work with senior executives from our hotel members and partners to really address key challenges which are affecting our planet and its people. Our members make up over 40% of the global hotel industry by rooms, and this includes 23 leading global hotel companies with a combined reach of 50,000 properties and 7 million rooms. We also work with other parts of the value chain, including owners, investors, and other partners through our affiliate membership, which really enables us to create a more joined up industry approach to tackling sustainability issues. Further to this, on the next slide, thank you, we provide a platform for governments, non-profits, foundations and other sector partners to work with the hospitality industry on various regional and global issues. And we have a vision which is for a prosperous and responsible hospitality sector that gives back to the destination more than it takes across 4 key areas of people, planet, place and prosperity, with an aim to create a better and more sustainable future for everyone.
And what are the key benefits the industry is seeing in taking action on all of this?
Well, as we mentioned in the first webinar of this series, there are many benefits, financial and reputational, to building and operating a hotel sustainably. Today, you're going to talk a lot about boosting profit margins through utility savings and increasing value by certification. These and other benefits, such as increased staff engagement and retention, when they can see that you're a company that really aligns with their values, are described in detail in our report, which we co-published with IFC and is available on our website. However, some of the key questions that we often hear are things like, how do we know what to do first and how do we finance the work? At the Alliance, we've been helping the industry to start to answer the first question by creating the pathway to net positive hospitality, which brings them together to align behind the most material and crucial issues and shows how they can achieve our vision of a prosperous and responsible hospitality sector that gives back to the destination more than it's taking. It breaks the journey to net positive hospitality down into 4 stages with a step-by-step approach for measuring impact, minimizing negative impact, achieving net zero while leaving no one behind, by engaging with suppliers and taking innovative approaches, And finally, by giving back more than you take across the whole value chain. And we have additional resources as well that we've created, such as our Environmental Action Planner, which can give hotel companies an idea of the different types of operational actions that they can take and retrofit options that there are across issues such as climate, water, waste and biodiversity. And this can be personalised into an action plan by using the various options that you see along the top to filter by environmental issue, by stakeholder relevance, cost, ease of implementation and potential impact, as well as the relevant departments of the hotel that would need to be involved.
Thank you, Claire. I'm sure there'll be much more questions for you at the end of the webinar. So please, again, post your questions in the chat and we will either try to answer them during the webinar or the very end. From the IFC side, one of the things that I'll mention is in the last webinar, we talked about IFC's integrated program, which we call GRIP, and that stands for Greening Real Estate Investment Portfolios. GRIP is a one-stop shop, much like the Pathway to Net Positivity, building on the concept to help asset owners define, implement, and most importantly from IFC side, to finance their green transition. IFC can help clients. Now, the one caveat is that they do have to be in emerging markets with a strategy and to be able to finance the implementation. Now that we covered the housekeeping from the previous sessions, I want to make sure that you know that in today's sessions, you will learn about EDGE, which is an innovation of IFC. EDGE is a green building standard and a certification system that empowers building professionals to quickly and easily determine the most cost-effective ways to build green based on building type and the local climate. During the live demo of the EDGE platform, you will see how the built-in financial calculator makes connections between technical measures and profitability, which is what we build into the GRIP program. Case studies of hotels who have successfully utilized EDGE with very little incremental cost, differentiating themselves through green certification and branding association with the World Bank Group, will illuminate the business drivers for green action. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Michelle Farrell, who is the Senior Operations Officer at IFC, who will explain EDGE and walk us through a live demonstration. Claire, you can feel free to turn off your camera until the question and answer period. But Michelle, let's turn over to you. Can you, in more detail, explain what EDGE is and what are the full components of the program?
Great, thanks so much, Rosemary. As you heard in our last session, IFC created the Green Building Market Transformation Program for a comprehensive approach to sustainable buildings. It is part of a 4-part strategy that is anchored by the EDGE program. Now, EDGE stands for Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiencies. Our initiative consists of 3 different components. First, you're going to see, and which we will demo today, the free software that helps you choose the most cost-effective way to build green. Now, the software is free, it's cloud-based online, and can be accessed from the EDGE website. Second, EDGE is an achievable green building standard. It starts with a 20% resource efficiency criteria that puts the buildings on a path towards net zero achievement. And third, EDGE is a certification system to verify and reward green building projects through a green label. Now, this quantitative approach and free software helps a property such as La Vista Villas in Phuket, Thailand. Now, on this project, they were able to calculate their actual energy and water savings, and were able to choose the green measures that offered them the best return on investment. And this is something we'll keep going back again today about, is that return on investment in making those design choices.
Excellent.
Now, how do we do this? Well, the approach is possible because the EDGE software is the first of its kind in the world, and it cuts the complexity and putting the complexity of the application behind the user interface, making it much easier for you to use and to be able to cut back on the resource intensity of your building designs. Now, Edge is a great comparison tool. It compares your green building to a conventional building or a building with business as usual behavior. Importantly, when we are comparing buildings of the same type and same location, that means that if your city hotel is, in Ghana, it's not going to be compared to a luxury resort, let's say in Greece. The software even looks at microclimates within a country. So a building on the humid coast of Kenya will have a very different profile than one in the temperate climate of Nairobi. You will also see in this live demo in just a bit, what the system allows you to do is to choose your green building strategies and calculate their financial and environmental impacts.
That's excellent, Michelle. The built-in financial calculator is one of the features I always liked about Edge and a true differentiator, I believe, of the program. And you mentioned, that this is the first and only green building system to offer that. Michelle, can you let us know what other ways that Edge is different from other certification systems? Most people may know LEED or BREEAM. So what is it in Edge that's different from these other competitors on the market?
Well, to start with, Edge is the only green building rating system created by a bank. IFC is the first and foremost a financial institution, and we wanted to help our clients understand the impact on the planet, but also at the same time, the impact on their bottom line. The financial calculator and the association with the World Bank brand are some of the ways we achieved international acclaim for this program. Edge is still the new kid on the block, as it were, so you may not have heard of us before, and that's because we did not have staff to launch awareness programs in your country. But in places like Africa, Edge is now 75% of all green building certifications. You've already seen that Edge is a quantitative approach with a data-driven methodology for resource efficiency. This is because we don't just assign points for green measures, but we use bioclimatic modeling that is specific to a location and building type. Finally, we have a streamlined process where the shorter certification workflow saves you time and money on your project.
That's great. And the statistics from Africa was something I love to hear because I helped launch some of the programs there. So Michelle, I'm going to turn over presentation rights to you right now so that you can work us through the demo that you mentioned. So can you let us know what all of this actually looks like in practice through a live demo?
Great. So I just want to check that you can see my screen.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so now we are inside of the Edge application. You can access the Edge application by going directly to edgebuildings.com, and you will be able to see a link on the upper right-hand side to the Edge app. Now, anybody can start to use this calculator starting today. The tool is free. You can register your project, and you can also use this as a design tool to see the impact of your design choices on a project. So let's go through the interface. On the left-hand side, we're going to see all the different project typologies that we can choose. We have things from service departments, hotels, bigger resorts, retail, and different types of mixed-use typologies can also be addressed with the tool. We also have all of the building types globally available around the world. So things like hotels we define, but also we can go even deeper into this by defining the type of hotel. Is this a 5-star hotel? Is this a budget hotel? All of these implications are going to be included in the calculations of this tool. Now we set our location and finally the project details. I like the words that Rosemary used before, the one-stop shop idea. This is exactly what we're going for here inside of Edge. All your project documentation can be uploaded into the application itself. And as we'll see later, when you submit for certification, you also upload those details on this app. So it's truly a one-stop shop. You're not going to different tools and working in different areas. There's also the ability to go as deep into design as you want, or starting at the preliminary stages. One thing we always encourage when working with Edge is to start as early as possible. The preliminary design choices that you make are going to have great impact, but be the lowest cost as well. And then as we get more detailed into the project, we can go in and customize all of our building data, all of our room information, everything about the operational details. And then if we're going into things like carbon emissions, we can define where our fuel sources are going from so that we can see the impact of that as well. But you can see everything, all the details about the hotel are addressed in here.
Michelle, before one of the questions that came up, and this is great, we can do some live answers here. Talk about the mechanism to compare different countries when you have hotels. So let's really deep dive a little bit around the concept of a local baseline and the benchmark, and how that particular part works.
Yes, exactly. And I think this is one of the most powerful pieces of the tool, right? Is that we have an established baseline all over the world. So for any location that you put in, you're going to have the details of this base case business as usual building. So we put in the floor, sub-project floor area. So this is about 8,000 square meters. This base case is then developed on this size building. So we're going to say a base case building of this size with typical materials, behavior, heating and cooling patterns. How does that building behave? So that is creating our base case. When we then work to do our improved case, we're doing better than this business as usual building. So the base case is going to be relative, as we said earlier in the presentation. If we're in Nairobi, it's going to reflect the exact conditions there. If we're in another location, it's going to reflect those conditions on the ground. So this is always relative to what's happening on the site. And of course, this in turn will affect your design decisions. So somewhere where I may have a greater impact by adding external shading devices in a cool area or a cool region, that's not going to have as much impact on my project. So all of the choices that I make they will have implications on my cost, but also be very climate relative. I can't just add shading devices and expect to see the same effect from them in two completely different locations. So everything's site specific, cost specific, and compared to that base case business as usual that's on the site. So let's see how you do that. On the top toolbar, you will see all of the different metrics that are available. And this is really important because as we start to adjust our building inside of the program, we want to know a couple things. All of the design choices that we make on the left-hand side, how are they going to first save energy, save water, or save embodied energy and materials? But second, what is the cost implication of this? So every time I make a choice, I'm going to be immediately able to save what that has on reducing my utility cost per month. I can see, for example, the water savings as well. But then also, how does this result in my utility cost savings? And then finally, what is my payback period? So this particular building that I quickly put together this morning without doing a lot of details on this, is a 7% increase in cost, and then it will tell your payback period as well. So all of this information is immediately available as I choose and select different design choices. So on the first tab, we're going to look at energy. Now, energy are the key pieces here. I want to look at reducing the operational energy of my building. How am I able to do that? Well, first, we want to start with those passive or preliminary design measures where we can impact the design of the hotel. So maybe reducing our window to wall ratio, things like solar reflective index of our walls, choices that I can make during the design stage about the actual condition of my building are low cost, easy to implement, and things I can start to do as I'm thinking about the design of my hotel. Then we get into more of the active measures. So things like more efficient HVAC systems, more efficient ways to deal with domestic hot water, boilers, ground source heat pumps. All of these different things can then be looked at in more detail. As I make my choices and build up my different categories, every time I make that choice, I'm going to see the effect that it has on the different elements that use energy within my building. And it's going to show that reduction.
And what do the colors mean, Michelle?
So the colors are going to define the different types of energy use that we have inside of our building. So where we have been using energy on equipment, we've been using it on cooling, all of that is going to be defined here. And you can specifically see what measures these elements are then impacting. So we're reducing our equipment energy. Are we reducing our heating energy? Are we reducing our cooling energy, for example? Then we also at the bottom, if we are reducing our impact, we can see the carbon emissions and then what impact our improved case has on that in terms of reducing the carbon emission impact of our project. So now going to some of the different tabs. First, we have energy. Then we also have water that we want to look at. So things like water efficient shower heads, water efficient faucets for bathrooms, all of these things are going to be part of that analysis. And finally, embodied energy and materials. And the way we like to explain embodied energy and materials is that's kind of a cradle to gate analysis, meaning from when we sourced the materials to when they went through the manufacturing process until they left the gate of that manufacturer. How much energy was consumed in the creation of that material? So we're going to consider the different materials against each other, and I'm going to choose those. And again, seeing the impact not only on the overall comparison to the base case, but specifically for each individual product category. Now, finally, when we're going in here, again, going back to that one-stop shop idea, you are also able to upload all those documents. So as I start to provide evidence, as I'm going in to get final certification on my project, this is where I upload all the documentation, including manufacturer's data, performance data, as PDF documents for then the certifiers to go in and check and analyze my project to make sure I comply. And then finally, when the project is completed, if I am going for zero carbon certification, I will be dealing in the operations tab. And this is where I can put in operational data. This is after my building is completed. If I do want to go for zero carbon, which is reaching Edge Advanced, which is 40% more efficient than business as usual building in the energy category. If I want to take that to zero carbon by offsetting that, then maybe I'm having solar panels or a different sort of clean energy that I'm procuring off-site, I will then analyze this here, provide this after my building has been in operation to achieve the zero carbon certification. But again, this is all encompassing in one tool. If I'm not submitting this for certification, I can also just use this to test and see how my project is performing. So that is an overview of the tool.
We have some great questions. If you actually want, you can continue sharing, Michelle, and go to the design tab. I think we can answer a few questions now, and other questions we'll be able to answer at the end. So one of the main questions was, if a city does not appear in the list, how can we put in the inputs? If you want to go more, I cut you off. I think maybe we're going to show it down in the advanced features, the place where you can put in the coordinates and other ideas as well.
Exactly. So you are able to put in all of your project details here in complete detail. So what we are seeing from the drop-down menu are the options that are readily available for the cities that are there. But we can always go in and just in here, you can put in all of your coordinates, all of your project details. Again, everything with the climate data can be customized as well. This is going to be putting in the elevation of your project. If you are in a particular area where you want to go as far as maybe changing the latitude and longitude, maybe you actually have some information that's updated. Maybe this is an older weather file and you have more updated data on the relative humidity, or you want to test that in a different way. As Rizmir said, all of this is customizable. You have and what I guess is so powerful about this as well is you have the ability to stay very general, do an analysis at the beginning of a project, or go and dive deep in where you want to include all of this additional information.
Absolutely. And Michelle, you talked about it earlier, the idea that you can sort of test different versions. One of the things that I remember vividly, we had a session with our Edge experts, and we'll talk about the trainings and other ways. That's one of the questions that came here, can we have employee training? But our edge experts, if you're a consultant listening to this, we're saying, because this is free, and we'll talk about why it's free with the help of our donors, and because it's so fast, you as a consultant can run models and scenarios and present to decision makers. So you don't have to spend hours and hours working out models. You can say, well, here's option one. Maybe you're a resort and you don't want to have smaller windows, but maybe you can, offset it with some sort of shading device. Or there's option two, another. So there's lots of ways that we can do this. A few more questions here, Michelle. Let's really talk about the baseline. So if you can talk about IFC's process of consulting the local market, green building councils, revising the baseline, so that people really understand the consultative process that IFC undergoes to make EDGE really, I call EDGE sort of tool of the people in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a detailed process that we go through in establishing the baseline for different markets. In most of the markets where we are highly used, there are some cases where we have, in development of this baseline, we have consulted with the local market. We've been involved with, some of the local agencies that have consulted us in how we establish that local business as usual baseline. So the business as usual would be a typical building. And that means it may or may not be totally up to the latest code. It would be what's typical that you see in the market. So if we're looking at an average type of an apartment building, for example. Another thing that we want to talk about, which we're going to go to in the presentation after, is if you have an actual type of building that you're comparing against, like a retrofit, you can actually set that baseline and use that as a comparison tool against a building that is an actual building. So if we're doing retrofit, we can go as far as specifying that exact building that we're comparing against. Here we're comparing as a baseline business as usual building. Sometimes when we go into a market, we will further customize this. So we do appreciate any feedback that you do have about baselines that are being used in different markets.
Great. Michelle, one of the questions, it looks like we have some Europeans who are looking at this. And so let's talk about the European standards. So my understanding is, a building in, let's say, we mentioned Nairobi in Kenya, is going to have a very different baseline than a building in Germany. And can you talk about the process to include European standards into the baseline of EDGE itself?
Yes. So as Rosemary has mentioned, having a European building is going to be significantly different than what you're comparing against if you're looking in Nairobi. So in places where we have a lack of building code or lack of regulation, we are establishing that business as usual building as a typical building. In a country where we do have regulation that defines what that standard is, that is what's going to be your baseline. So you'll notice in Europe, as mentioned, you're going to have a much higher standard baseline to achieve. So you may find that a lot of your existing buildings, which we will look at, may actually be worse than what the baseline is asking you for. So you may have to improve it even more. But again, we'll look at that during retrofit.
Great. Let's do one more question for here, and Michelle, for you to prep the PDF. So one of the questions was from folks is, what does the output look like? So if you can do the downloadable PDF from the app and show the folks what the information looks like there. Mm-hmm. And then I can show you as well on my screen while this is loading, yes, the output on a portfolio basis, if you will, when it comes to the output in Excel. So let me do that while you prep the screen one. So for all of you who are wondering what the outputs look like, you can see I have a lot of tests, I'm running this. So you actually can get all the information for you in Excel. You can export all your results. Let's say you're doing a portfolio certification. Maybe you are a consultant, or you are a project owner that has 10, 15, 100 properties. We'll talk about some of our portfolio certifications. You can actually export all of those results here in one place. And then Michelle will show you on her side what that looks like when it comes to the individual buildings PDF. So it really, the output is available for both ends.
Exactly. So here are all the details that we have for the project. It's going to tell you titles of the project, anything about the sub-project details. So that means if you have different sub-projects that are part of a larger project, it also breaks down things. And I know people may also ask a question about construction costs, also customizable. So if you have specific costing data, you can also put that into the program to make this even more accurate. You also have all your engineering checks, such as your engineering and loads breakdown, so you can check the data, make sure that it looks as it should be. You also have all of your calculation methodology, your fuel source data, everything that was included. Temperature breakdowns. So someone had asked if this is not using it on your exact site, maybe it's a close site. This is going to tell you, do your temperature defaults match up? So if I was using ASHRAE monthly weather data, for example, I could say, okay, well, it's fairly close, or I need to change that slightly. Also, again, climactic, more information on your climate data. And then finally, your results and that information that's going to give you the key details on your project. Now, if we are running different scenarios, this is something I can export at any time during the process. So I may want to say this is hotel option 1, where I used smaller windows and no shading devices. Run it again. Here's hotel option 2 with shading devices and bigger windows. So we can really make this a case-by-case analysis tool and analysis report. And this is the way we encourage people to use it. Use it as a design tool. Keep your costs low. Find those best choices. And again, being able to get these reports very quickly helps. It also is going to give you a breakdown of what those energy efficiency measures were. This is very helpful as well in running those scenarios, because it's going to remind you of what is exactly there and what you did. And even going as far as testing different equipment. So if I put in different COP, for example, of my boilers, or different performance of my equipment, I could test one against the other and see that it doesn't make sense for me to go up from, you know, another 10% increase in cost for my HVAC system, but maybe that will save me even more energy. So I can test as well down to that detail, and all that information will be in this summarizing document. This will then be used to submit for my final or preliminary or final certification. And then I will receive a certificate for the project once it is approved.
Great. And so one of the other questions that came up was also, you know, can we do the calculations? What does that look like? So as Michelle mentioned, you can run different simulations, option 1, 2, 3, do them directly here, or export them as in an Excel sheet, and you can then cut your different measurements, whether you're looking at total emissions or total water consumption, or consumption per meter square. All of that will be available for you.
Exactly.
Let's move on with the PowerPoint. We have a couple of other pieces of content, but these questions are great, and we'll see how much we can answer at the end of them. Michelle, can you talk about where people can find additional information about EDGE, and how they can get a sort of top-up training, if you will?
Of course. Now, this is just a very light dive into EDGE, and there's a lot more that you can learn about it. So if you want to find more information, the first, which is a great place to start, is our YouTube channel. We have short training videos that will show you how to assess your building, meet the EDGE standard, and how to certify your project.
And going with the EDGE standard itself, so what does it actually take to get EDGE certified? You mentioned some of this, but let's really do a deep dive of the different options for certification.
That's right. So I had alluded to EDGE Advanced. So we'll talk about these 3 different levels of EDGE certification. Now, to be base level EDGE certified, a building must be 20% better than the local baseline. And that was the baseline we talked about in the demonstration. It must show 20% savings in energy, water, and embodied energy and materials. Now, the next level is Edge Advanced, which is 40% or more on-site energy savings. Now, we consider this level zero carbon ready. So this means that a building should do all it can on site before turning to off-site carbon reduction solutions. We don't want a highly inefficient building that's using carbon offsets, calling itself net zero, which is why we define that you have to get to Edge Advanced at least. But we also recognize that not all buildings can get on-site efficiency, so they will likely need to procure additional renewable energy off-site. Now, in this case, getting to 40% efficiency prepares them for eventual zero carbon status. And finally, we have zero carbon buildings. For these buildings, their entire electricity consumption comes from renewable sources, and they can use offsets to top off the rest of their fuel consumption.
Excellent. And one of the questions that came up in the chat was, is Edge only available for hotels, or can I use it for different types of buildings?
So no, not at all. Edge is actually available across many different building types. So if you're an asset owner or an investor with multiple property types in your portfolio, you can use Edge to green all of your buildings.
What I like to say is that, if it has walls and if it has a roof, it can be certified. We've done some really creative things with a stadium. We're doing airports now, so there's a lot of really great progress. And again, the question came up is Edge only available for new buildings, or do we have an offer for retrofits?
Exactly. So to continue on that, Edge is available for both new buildings and retrofits. And when you look at the breakdown of the type of projects that we do, and especially recently with the program GRIP that Rusmir has mentioned, these are actually a lot of retrofit projects. Now, we're working on an improvement that will make this process a bit smoother, but for now, the way that it works is you would first model the building as is. So that becomes this case that you're showing here. So you can see in this case, this building has a negative 15% efficiency. So that actually means it's 15% worse than the baseline of a similar building coming online today. So to bring this back to the question about European codes, this would mean that it's 15% worse than the building of its type in that region by the minimum standards. So then you would model the improvements. After this retrofit, the building is 23% better. Then again, we're comparing against that baseline. But in reality, it's actually 38% better from its starting point. So we're able to define both the improvement from where we started, but also understand where we fit relative to a business as usual building of its type. So this is the same process that we use in IFC's GRIP program, as I said, which we presented in the last session. The retrofit process can be executed for an individual building or for a portfolio of buildings. When we work with a portfolio, we typically group properties into 3 to 5 clusters, depending on their location and type. We do some high-level modeling to understand which measures will give the best results, given that this is an existing building. And once we confirm a general way forward, then we can confirm the strategy on each level of the property. Now, future versions of Edge will allow for even more fine-tuning of these costs, allowing you to override the system and include your own cost projections. This will make Edge even more useful to you as a one-stop shop energy and cost modeling tool.
Michelle, that's great. It's a really great overview of the tool. And as the questions were also coming up was, well, who has actually gone through the Edge certification and what case studies do we have?
Well, we have a lot of people that have gone through this process. The Edge website is going to be a great resource for this. We have a whole library of different case studies from around the world. Now here you can see a small preview of just the certified hotels, but you can filter by other property types or see projects certified in your country. Now keep in mind, this is not a comprehensive list. There may be other projects that you don't find online. You can also see that we have representation from operators of some of the biggest brands, such as Hilton, Marriott, Accor, as well as some other local brands like Fiesta Americana in Latin America or Panorama Land in Indonesia. If you haven't heard of EDGE before, it's likely because our initial focus was in select emerging markets. Remember, we come from the World Bank Group, and our mission is international development. However, through partnerships with global certifying partners, EDGE is now a rapidly growing global program that is available everywhere in the world. We just recently crossed the 50 million square meters mark of certified space, and we're continuing to grow.
That's great. Michelle, let's pause here. One of the questions came from Europe. What is our experience in Europe? Where is EDGE growing? You can talk maybe a little bit about Lidl, the Schwartz experience, because it's one of the things people may not know is that Lidl is certifying all of their stores with EDGE. So let's talk about the European experience and the recent business development there.
Yes, so I'll touch on a couple things in terms of Europe, and let's talk about EU taxonomy as well as another angle of this. So when we have started in Europe, we actually have some of the, I believe in Denmark right now, we have the most square meters certified with EDGE in terms of volume within a country. And this is through the investment program that we had with Schwartz Group, where they are certifying their entire portfolio of Lidl and Kaufland stores. And this has been throughout Croatia, Romania, Poland, Denmark, Spain, for example, also has a very large recent portfolio. So we are no stranger to being used in Europe, whether that's Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Central Europe. We have example projects in all of these locations. One of the recent seminars that we had was how we align with EU taxonomy and what are the impacts of EU taxonomy in terms of someone who may be working in emerging markets and has property based in the EU, but also taxonomy alignment. So for a lot of countries who are looking to prepare for future taxonomies that are coming out, how is the European taxonomy going to have an impact on that? So we have created an alignment documentation that tells you how to create the required metrics for reporting with EU taxonomy. I also saw, again, someone coming up on the ESG. So for reporting methodology, whether that's things like GRESB, or you're working with CPD, or you're working with, CDP, and you're working with any of the other ESG reporting standards on the market, EDGE is applicable and actually accepted for these reporting standards. So I would say whether you're using it for the actual calculations and you're looking to use that to show how efficient your properties are, that's great. Another thing that you're using it for is looking to benchmark your properties. I know big risk is going to be stranded assets, issues with brown properties. How do we identify and find out of our entire project portfolio, what are the poorest performing properties? And we have a lot of people who are now today using EDGE as a tool for just understanding where their properties sit, where they, in terms of benchmarking, are they going to be okay in terms of the EU taxonomy? So this is another way it's being used. But if you have any questions specifically on EU taxonomy, please drop us an email after this and we have that alignment documentation we can send you.
Great, and I think as you can see with our partnership with the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, we're happy to sort of bring that information over. So, and you'll see IFC partners with other certifiers. So if it's not sort of appropriate for us to be involved with projects, if they're coming from developed countries, our certifiers, Sintali, SGS, and then GBCI, which actually also administers the LEAD program, they're the ones that can ultimately help you. So we do invite you to partner with us to continue to doing webinars like this and to bring that information over. Let's go into a few more case studies and to go through that process.
Okay, I just wanted to address one question I saw
Sure.
pop up, which was the existing buildings. Can you only do it by a major retrofit, or can you just assess the performance of your property? So this is a great question. In some of our properties where we're dealing with Lidl, for example, in Denmark, some of their properties did actually comply. So it didn't have to go through a major retrofit. It could go in and do the analysis of it and the existing status of the property. Because it was built so energy efficiently to start with, it didn't have to do a major retrofit. So this can apply to existing buildings either way.
Great.
Okay. So now to get into some specific cases, I want to talk about two case studies from very different types of hotels that have been used to certify green with EDGE. Now, this Sheraton is an eco-concept resort in Indonesia, which used EDGE to achieve an impressive 46% savings in energy. Now, to compare this, a very different property is the 12-story Hampton by Hilton Hotel in the financial district of Quito in the capital of Ecuador. This property used very different strategies given its climate and customer profile, a resort versus a city hotel, but was also able to achieve an impressive 54% savings in energy.
That's great. And you will see, and we'll bring up Claire at the end for some of the questions around the business value in the business case for sustainable hotels. Some of the case studies we talked about were hotels that were able to reach the green certification without necessarily having a incremental cost. They were able to change the supply, do some very, very smart choices, and get to the 20%, at least on the 20% side, even with zero incremental cost, which I think is a great achievement. Let's switch a little bit and talk about the certification itself. So Michelle, you talked about the fact that the tool can be used for self-assessment, but why is it important for the hotel to be certified as green? Can they just use EDGE, but not worry about certification? Why go through that pain?
Yeah, so you heard it on our last webinar, but it's worth repeating that only certified buildings fully comply with international green finance standards. This is also important with ESG, which is a question that also came up. So there are 3 common criteria across international green finance standards. First, a green building should be certified as green using international standards. And there's some more detail around that in terms of being third-party certified, but there are some regulations that certain systems do comply here. 2, it should also have at least 20% better performance in energy and water consumption compared to the local baseline. And then finally, it should be able to report their impact, such as the savings on energy, water, and GHG emissions. Now, once you comply with these criteria, that means that you can access international green finance or comply with the standards that GRESB or CDP outline for their reporting requirements. Now, this approach has allowed Ascot to commit to certifying hundreds of their projects worldwide. The Ascot is one of the leading owner-operators, particularly in the service department space. Capital Land, the parent company of Ascot, recently raised $150 million in a sustainable linked bond issued with IFC support, and the company has raised about $450 million in sustainable financing overall. So whether you are a small hotel operator, a bigger chain, or an investor, the compliance with green finance criteria may mean that you can get better financing terms through investors offering sustainable linked finance, either better interest rates, longer tenors, or other incentives.
And that's a great question that came up in the chat. What is it to these operators? So on the EDGE website, we actually have a link. I mean, maybe we could show it at the very end, of banks that are providing incentives. So a lot of our banking partners give, let's say, a 0.5% interest rate reduction that gets passed on to buildings that are green certified. We have had other projects, for example, that refinanced their debt. We have a project was the first green bond issued in Cote d'Ivoire. They saved 1.5% on their initial construction loan when they refinanced as a green bond. I think there's one example of a lowered insurance premium as well. So there's a lot of benefit whether you want to raise international green finance or come to the level, in your particular country, because investors are now competing for these projects. They have made commitments and they don't have enough projects to go around.
Now, another reason is what Claire hinted at the beginning of the webinar, increasing your value with certification and addressing consumer preferences. Now, I think many of you know, Booking.com recently rolled out their Travel Sustainable program. To receive the highest level of recognition, these accommodations that are recognized with a certified badge will include the name of that certification and will allow you to reach that highest level. Now you can see screenshots of the Booking.com listing for a few EDGE certified properties. We are of course compliant with Booking's criteria, so an EDGE certification automatically qualifies you for recognition. Now this is one example of how IFC works with our certified properties. We have a marketing toolkit and we will help you receive recognition locally and globally through our communication channels here in the World Bank. Now, wouldn't it be great if your hotel was the next one we are showing on the next round of webinars?
Exactly, that's our hope. And I think this consumer preference now, especially with the millennial and Gen Z population, is certainly something to think about. And the statistics are further explained, as I mentioned, in the business case paper. Maybe we'll have Claire end with that in the end and talk about repeating the business case for going green. So let's talk about, you mentioned the value of the certification, but what is the cost? How much will this cost my property? What is the process? Am I really going to get those returns?
So to go into the cost and the steps, let's first address the EDGE certification workflow. EDGE projects receive both preliminary EDGE certification at the design stage and final EDGE certification at the post-construction stage. A building currently under construction can skip the preliminary process and go straight to final certification. As soon as the certificate is issued, a project study can be submitted for publishing on the EDGE website, with social media coverage provided across all of our EDGE channels. The EDGE logo and brand guidelines are also provided for investor or sales promotion purposes. As we also mentioned, the zero carbon certificate is the operational certificate, which is approached after the building has a year of operational data and significant occupancy.
And Michelle, one of the questions that came up was, what would prevent the hotel from just submitting something on design and then doing something else in the construction? Can you talk about the site audit and the process of ensuring that this gets implemented? We'll talk about it on this slide.
Yeah, so at the preliminary stage, what we are certifying is exactly what the person who asked the question addressed. We're assessing the design. So that preliminary certificate is issued for a limited period of time. It will not last forever on that design itself. However, once construction is underway, we go as far as having that person come on site, measuring the volume of water, for example, that's coming out of the faucets, checking that the equipment is installed as required, as stated, that the purchase was made for certain types of material. So that site audit, that construction audit, all of that is going to provide that third-party verification to prove that, yes, what was designed, what was implemented and said that they were going to do, that's actually been done. And that is the power really of this type of certification in verifying and then being able to trust the brand later that this is a certified property.
Let's talk about how the brand is then displayed on the building.
Yes. So again, there are many benefits to having certification, and branding is a big part of this. Now, each project is going to receive a certificate, and plaques and decals are also available. So the certificate itself can be used to satisfy your investor or be recognized on platforms such as Booking.com, even in your sales material, as many of our clients do. And the plaque is used at the entrance to showcase your achievement to consumers. Now, one of the main reasons IFC launched EDGE was that we heard that the certification process could be very expensive and very cumbersome. So we looked to simplify this compliance process. You saw during the live demo that you would be able to upload the supporting documents in the exact same place where you are identifying green measures. That means you also don't have to pay costly consultants to prepare your documentation. The transparency of this process means that projects can be certified, including with consultancy costs, somewhere between $5,000 to $10,000 on average. Obviously, this is an extremely rough figure, but our certifiers will always give you a quote before you start the process. So again, you'll have all the information in one place. And with the free tool, you'll be able to complete the self-assessment and know whether you are reaching the EDGE standard or if you need to push your design further. And with the certification quote, you'll know exactly the cost to certify before you start this process.
And Michelle, you mentioned getting consultants to help, and it also goes with some of the questions that have come up through around training. So do I have to hire a consultant? Is there a way to get trained up for in-house EDGE expertise?
Well, the good thing, it's your choice. You can really do both. We have many ways to access training. For example, we offer EDGE expert training through pre-recorded modules that you watch on your own time, through live streaming on online trainings. And now that we're coming out of the COVID pandemic, we are restarting local in-person trainings. Now, for an example, our partner Centali has live stream trainings that are already organized for May and June. We'll make sure that the link for these trainings is posted on the registration site for the webinars, which is the same place we'll have the recording. And again, don't forget edgebuildings.com. You'll be able to find all the information under our events as well.
Hey, can you talk about the accreditation that the EDGE experts receive by IFC? What can they do, personally after they go through this training? Let's talk about it on this slide. Yeah.
Right. So this is a great point as well. When you become an EDGE expert, you are not only showing that you know and understand the EDGE submission process, EDGE Green Building certification process, but you're able to support different clients through this process. When you're working on a project, for example, with Centali, they will actually provide an EDGE expert as part of your process. To become an EDGE expert, you should have a good base knowledge of the construction industry. And when you go through the test, you do both a specific training, which is going to prepare you for the test, and an exam, which is given by our partner Prometric. Once you pass that exam, you become a certified EDGE expert, and your profile will then be able to be listed on our page to provide the type of consultancy services that I mentioned.
Yeah, let's show what those profiles look like.
Exactly. So this is just a snapshot of what it looks like when you search for them in your country. For example, this is a list of EDGE experts in Colombia.
Excellent. I think we're wrapping up the process, and it's a really comprehensive overview. So you mentioned, that the EDGE tool is free. So who can we actually thank for that?
Well, we definitely have to thank our donors for this. The EDGE program is generously supported by our government donors, which is why you're able to access many of these features for free. EDGE is currently funded by the UK government with the original funding from Switzerland's State Secretariat of Economic Affairs, also known as SECO, with additional funding provided by the donors that you can see here.
Wonderful. Claire, if I can have you, before we get to Q&A, I think I'd like to go back, to this part. This seemed maybe worth repeating. We mentioned it in the last webinar, but let's go through again, recapping some of the real business reasons that hotels, whether they're bigger chains or smaller operators, would want to go through this process.
Yeah, sure, definitely happy to do that. So yeah, as we mentioned, there are various reasons for going through this process. The first is really around boosting those profit margins. So you can see that sustainable buildings are about 20% or more resource efficient than standard buildings, which obviously reduces utility costs. And the savings can then be ploughed back into further improving sustainability. So that can really help to avoid, or to help with those costs anyway. Then there's the fact that it can really increase revenue. So Michelle touched there on the fact that Booking.com have found that people are much more interested. And we're seeing that increase both on the leisure side, which Booking.com are looking into, but also on the corporate customer side. There's a lot more focus on that. People are asking a lot more questions before they're signing up to buy rooms from companies. So there's a lot of I guess pressure there on hotel companies to really show what they're doing and prove it as well, be able to prove with things like EDGE certification. As well as that, it's about future-proofing investment strategies. So really investing in those portfolios, making sure that they're not going to become stranded assets, and that they're able to gain access to different types of investment as well. And then something that's becoming ever more important is safeguarding against regulatory risks and benefiting from incentives. It feels like every week there's a new piece of legislation that's coming up. In different countries, they look at legislation in different ways. There's a whole plethora of pieces of regulation out there that are really impacting on businesses, and being able to show what you're doing and again kind of prove it through certification, prove it through data that you have, can be really beneficial. Then obviously increasing value and validation through certification is really important. And also finally ensuring a long-term supply of energy. So we know that we need to have energy there to be able to run all these buildings and serve the guests, if it's hotels or customers, whatever kind of building it is that you're looking at. So we need to make sure that we can maintain that long-term energy supply. And another thing that I would, sorry, just one more thing that I would mention, which I don't think we covered off in the initial business case, but it's linked to the customer preference, is the employee preference. That's something that is coming up the agenda more and more, is that people want to work for businesses that they feel a connection to. And a lot of people are getting more interested in sustainability and want to work for companies that are taking those actions to become more sustainable.
Excellent. So again, all of these reports are available to you. You can see you can download the report, and then the recording from the last webinar where we went through a few more of the case studies on the finance is also available. Let me end the screen sharing and look through the questions to see. I think that we tried to at least answer a few of them along the way. And let's see, I think we talked about the EU taxonomy. Hopefully that was answered. Let's see some of the questions here.
Yeah, I would just add that EU taxonomy, we will send out in the summary email with this mailing list.
Perfect.
For everyone who had attended.
So it's one of the interesting questions, right, is, can I go directly to zero carbon if I already have 1 year operation, or do I need to do something first? And I think similar question maybe for buildings in general. What are the steps if this is an existing building? How do they go through?
So can you just repeat that one? How with the existing building?
What are the steps for an existing building? Do they have to go, let's say a building wants to be certified as net zero, they've been operational for a year. Do they have to kind of go through all of the steps, or can they go for the final result in the end?
So you do need to go through the steps in terms of proving that you are at least EDGE advanced. You do not have to wait a year though, however, when you submit for zero carbon. So you can do that essentially right away. So you can include your operational data, but also you will need that calculation that shows how you compare to the EDGE baseline. But again, can be submitted at the same time if you have a year of data. So that's no problem.
I think what the certifiers that tell us, they typically do a quick check for your design documents to make sure they're not sending somebody for on-site if you're not going to pass. So they will work with you for your design features to kind of do a smell check, if you will, before they go into the final. So it is included, but they'll do a bit of an audit as well. I think this is an interesting question, Michelle. Would you recommend a hotel that is already LEED certified to also get EDGE certification? Is there added value? How do we position the EDGE brand vis-a-vis LEED?
Yeah, so I think we have a lot of customers who are actually doing dual or triple certification. I think one of the big drivers behind that is it being a leader in the industry, right? And wanting to potentially be the first building of your type with double, triple, different types of certification. It is a great way to not only engage with our consumers, but also gain attention from the press. We have a great project in the Philippines that has 3 different types of certification and has really, commands some of the highest rental rates in the market and has really established themselves as leaders when it comes to green. They speak at all the conferences. So it's a great way of differentiating your brand, I would say. Another thing to notice when the difference between EDGE and LEED and different types of certification is what they focus on for their energy thresholds. So when you're doing EDGE, one of the great things is you're really working on operational energy, operational water, all of those types of performance thresholds. And different rating systems look at it different ways. So if you're very focused on that reduction of energy operationally, a lot of people do like to use EDGE as a tool for achieving that, perhaps alongside other rating systems, just because they like the very strong focus on that operational reduction of energy and continuous reduction of operation of energy. But as with all these green rating systems, EDGE, BREEAM, LEED, they're all great tools. They're moving the market forward. We really support them. And as long as they're third-party certified, it's something that we encourage people to do. So absolutely, I would look at that. And we can also include some case studies after of the ones who did that double certification. It might be interesting to see why they did.
And I know there's a lot of cases where a local hotel may, certify with LEED their flagship program, their flagship hotel, but won't actually have other, kind of maybe lower brand or city hotels certified. So the encouragement there is that if you're committed to a green strategy, look at what else you're not certifying and go, EDGE can actually then satisfy that particular gap for you potentially.
And I've seen as well, just to add on that, in ESG strategies. So as you were saying, maybe LEED is for the top 3 hotels you've decided that you want to use in a certain way. Maybe there's 10 other hotels that you have that you also want to certify. So EDGE can be a great option. So you can define within your portfolio which ones are going to be EDGE, which will be LEED, and kind of develop a strategy for both. As the costs are significantly different, but the benefits in terms of certification with booking.com, having that compliance for green finance, having that compliance for ESG reporting provides all the same things. So if you're looking for a lower cost option as well to expand your certification, this could be an option.
Michelle, one of the questions is coming up on the EDGE experts. Are you allowed to only work in your country or can you work across multiple countries?
No, the great thing is you can work across multiple countries. Some of our EDGE experts I know in Indonesia are working in Africa even. It was a surprise last time I was there. So you can work in different markets, absolutely, and provide expertise wherever you're able to.
Great. One of the questions I have, Veronica, we may need you to clarify. You're asking if EDGE is used at startup stage and what is the process to get the certification. I think, Michelle, you mentioned the EDGE is really best used when it becomes part of the whole strategy, that when you can change the design or you're doing your retrofit. Let's talk about that again. What is the process there and how early do you have to start the design process?
Mm-hmm. So you can begin this process anytime you want. However, it is less costly to begin when you can impact the design, right? So we really encourage people to say, bring an EDGE expert or your consultant that you're going to have on a project. Start engaging with them as early as possible. So things like changing the orientation on the site. Maybe I don't want to have my glass wall for example, facing the south. Like these sort of things, I can make that decision early in design. However, when design progresses and we get into later stages, we may only have a chance to affect things like the efficiency of our HVAC system, or we may only be able to change, install economizers, or where if we don't start thinking early about natural ventilation, we're not going to have proper window design or setup for implementing that natural ventilation in the future. So by talking to the architect at those early stages about these interventions that you have that are looking at, then you can start to implement them. Other things like reflective walls and windows paint, these are things, again, you have to define early, but are your lowest cost options. As Rizmir said, some of these we're able to reduce the incremental cost to basically zero. I think another great project example that we have is a hotel in Mexico did a retrofit, and their incremental cost was zero. The interventions that they made were smart, were very targeted, and it did not add a lot of additional costs. So again, if you can get in early, make design choices early, make design changes to reflect those, then you're going to be able to optimize the hotel.
That's great. And in the business case paper, one of the examples that I loved was a hotel, I think it was in Fiji, that basically did a lease of their solar panels. So they worked with a solar installer and did not pay anything extra for the electricity. But because they were, they had to import diesel to run these generators, they were able to reduce their cost. I think it was by even 50%, if I recall. We're coming down to the end, and Vincent, let's see, Vincent had one question around better financial rates. I will post, and we'll make sure that this is included in the write-up, the info of the banks that are already providing better rates for certified projects. This could be a hotel or another building. We mentioned that there are international banks that are already doing this. So let's say HSBC, Standard Chartered in Africa, IFC is working with a lot of those banks to either fund them directly or to provide advice on how to incorporate this into their programs. You will see a lot conversation around what's called sustainable linked finance, where investors are really interested because, again, they have their own corporate commitments and they have to comply with the Paris Agreement, and so they're out there looking for quality projects, and they're willing to give a haircut on their interest rates. You'll see the banks that are already providing this.
I would just also add to that is that banks, because of our compliance with ICMA and the other standards that we align with, this means that even though you don't see your bank on that list, approach your bank for a question. Are you offering sustainable finance? Is this something you have? Because we may, in fact, comply for the use of proceeds, for example, of a green bond. So again, it's worth asking the question and always making sure to bring up the point that we are aligned. And we can provide you with any of that supporting documentation that you need.
Perfect. So it was a pleasure having you all on the call. I put in here, and again, we'll send the recording and the presentation as soon as the system generates it. It will be available on the landing site where you already registered. And again, if you haven't registered for the future webinars, please do so as well. We have our third in the series. We'll talk about resilience. So we talked a lot about kind of reducing the impact of climate change, but now we're going to talk about preparing for the inevitable, unfortunately, impact of climate change. So if you are a coastal hotel, if you're a hotel in a water-stressed area, but really I think if you're a hotel anywhere, this is going to happen. So we'll talk about our Building Resilience Index and some of the other tools that the Alliance has on water that's going to help you out. If we didn't get to your question, we'll try to send it out in an email. We're running out of time now, but it really was a pleasure to spend time with everybody, and the questions have been great, and we hope that we answered them. So thank you so much. I'll stop recording. We'll stay online for a few more questions, and thanks a lot.